Good idea. Okay. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. 1 2 3. Hey, welcome to the 100th episode of Music Tectonics podcast.
Yay!
We started this in December of 2018, and I decided from the beginning we wanted to do an MVP, minimum viable podcast, and that's how we've cranked out 100 episodes. We did at least one every week. There are moments. A year ago today, for example, we launched the ability to do a mobile podcast over at Meetum, which we wish we were in Cannes this week, but it's happening digitally right now when this thing airs. And today, we decided to try video. If you're listening on audio, you're not going to miss anything other than our faces. We just wanted to try something a little different with our MVP. We've been doing so many Zooms and webinars and all that stuff that we thought, let's apply it to the podcast. We keep learning as we go. And I'm so excited. I have my all-time favorite guest on Music Tectonics. She's not exactly a guest because she's our alternate host, Tristra New Year Yeager. She's our lead writer and strategist at Rock, Paper, Scissors. I didn't even introduce myself for the podcast. This is Dimitri Vitsa. I'm the host, and I'm also the CEO and founder of Rock, Paper, Scissors. We're a music tech PR firm, and like I said, we're up to our 100th episode. Super excited. The reason Tristra is one of my favorite guests, and she's done a lot of podcasts with me, without me. She's done them solo and so forth, is because she's one of the smartest people I know. And she's been with me for over 13 years at Rock, Paper, Scissors and pivoted every step of the way. So it's so great to have you on again, Tristra.
Hey, no, I'm very happy to be here. And it is an amazing, I'm just going to do something that Midwesterners don't like to do, which is brag on ourselves. And that is to say, it's amazing to reach 100 podcasts in that short span of time. And if you guys know Dimitri, you know he does a lot of other things as well. So Dimitri, big list. I'm going to take a moment to just say big ups to you and
thank you.
Take a bow. Okay, back pat it. Okay, there we go. Okay, we got that out of the way. Ooh, that was embarrassing.
Yeah, so today on our 100th episode, we thought we would kind of do a recap of what's been going on in music tech and the music industry, just things that we've noted from the past year plus since we started the podcast in these first 100 episodes. And so it's going to be kind of like some of the news roundups we've done on the podcast where Trisha and I just rap about stuff, and but a little bit kind of like a little broader view, and also bringing us up to date right now, because obviously we're recording this on May 29th. However, it will be airing on the first Thursday of June 2020. And so we've just kind of taken a look around post COVID lockdown. A lot of places are opening up. We're not opening up yet. We're going to wait and see what happens here. We're not following government orders. Sorry, we're gonna stay safe, and that's why we're remote. You see, Tristra's at home. I'm at home with my Frandy.
His tropical paradise home, yes.
Exactly, yeah. So, a lot has happened since we launched the podcast. Obviously, we had the Music Tectonics conference last October 2019 in LA in person. We had over 400 people in attendance, and that was great. We still have a hotel set for this October in LA for a conference as well. We have to talk to you guys out there in podcast land to see if you're able to come out, if we're all feeling safe and excited to finally meet back up. And I'm sure that depends on what's happening with the health and not just policies, but what people's appetite are for that. And I'd actually like you to contact me and tell me what you think about an all-person conference in October. So you can tweet at us, you can LinkedIn at us, you can Facebook, you can post to the musictectonics.com website, or the app. The Music Tectonics app is something we just launched, app.musictectonics.com, which is not only a Music Tectonics community app, it's really meant for all music tech, music innovators to come together. We post tons of articles there. We've got free resources and so forth. So join there. I'll talk about that more at the end of the podcast, but join there, app.musictectonics.com, and you can give us our feedback there. So Tristra, let's kick this off talking about the time since we started the podcast and what's been going on. I asked you for some suggestions of some of the trends that have been going on, and the first thing you mentioned was TikTok. What did you want to say about TikTok? I mean,
well, TikTok has been has really been playing a really prominent role in a lot of what has been discussed in recent months. And it's having its, like, I saw a journalist call it its Snap moment, its Snapchat moment. So it's like the hot new app that all the young cool kids are using. Though of course the demographics are shifting under lockdown, which is a whole other conversation. But it's also been, since Little Nas X, it's really sort of come to everyone's understanding about how TikTok can surface songs in such interesting ways, both new and interesting artists that no one had heard of before, like sort of feel like they're coming out of nowhere, though it's never exactly true. But then there's also the deep catalog that's being surfaced by TikTok. So a lot of folks are having fun, either like not breaking their stride or telling jokes to Harry Belafonte or all sorts of really awesome stuff. And I love that young folks are getting to engage with things like Harry Belafonte. I mean, like, what an amazing artist.
Or ABBA.
Or ABBA, for that matter. Those golden oldies. And it's, and it's just really cool to see how people are taking this and being creative. At the same time, there's a lot of interesting activity, commercialization, international intrigue. So TikTok is, whether it's a good marketing platform, what genres it's good for, like, is it already, washed or whatever those kids say. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. And one thing that's cool is that while I think it's being embraced by sort of the traditional music business, there's always there's more and more sort of platform wariness, maybe not the reactive, like we're going to sue your ass off kind of 90s approach. Like, I think that we've learned lessons from that. And that there is an interest in, like, all right, let's get this stuff licensed. Let's talk. Let's figure this out. How can we use this? Is it useful to us? We don't want to like give away the farm, but like how do we there's like a different kind of negotiating, I think, going on with platforms in the state age. Not to get too far afield, but yeah, TikTok.
Yeah, so TikTok, I mean, the thing is, when it started to emerge, first of all, people were really cognizant of the fact that it was a Chinese company, and there were these algorithms that didn't make sense to a lot of people here. There was like this strange, like, skyrocket when you first get on the platform that was new and different. And so there's this sense of discovery that could happen there. And of course, you have this iterative process where younger generations will join a platform that older generations can't even understand why it exists. And I think you're right, with the lockdown, we're seeing more families getting in on the dance competitions and pranks and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it was so weird when Vine came to a similar rise of notoriety and like literally disappeared overnight. There was clearly a yearning for it. And TikTok's a little bit different, obviously, than how Vine operated. But TikTok seems to be hiring fast. They seem to have a strong US presence of staff, and so an awareness of US culture in addition. So it's not just this thing from far away that's taking over here, but and they seem to be pivoting in terms of quickly watching what the uses are and evolving and adapting. So yeah, I'm glad you brought up TikTok, just because there's so much activity there right now. Interestingly, since TikTok arrived on the scene, I feel like Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and of course Twitch is a whole other story we could talk about, but have also kind of ramped up their engagement on music. They've been, obviously YouTube's been doing it all along, but with Facebook and Instagram, pushing some of the licensing conversations forward, whether it's about recorded music or whether it's about DJ'd music. That's hot right now to figure out, pulling down streams again is happening a lot. But it seems like TikTok is adding some variety to the mix. I don't know what the impact or influence on Spotify has been of TikTok or of Apple Music or Pandora. It really feels like it's more of the social side and the question of what happens when music is pulled off of a purely music listening experience into a different type of experience.
Yeah, it's more of a little fandom cauldron, which doesn't really exist on any of the streaming platforms in any meaningful way. I'm not looking at this right now, so shout at me if I've got this totally wrong, world out there. But I believe we were looking at some info from Chartmetrics, and they seem to imply that when something's taking off on TikTok, you may see some bump in streams. So I think it can work as like a big amplifier, and it can contribute to things that are more directly monetized for artists, but not necessarily. I mean, for instance, like the Break My Stride example, it started charting, and I don't believe TikTok is playing a role in that. I mean, playing a role in the actual charting process. It's stimulating people to go out and find the song and listen to it elsewhere. So it's not
Trisha,
completely enclosed,
yeah, the cool thing about what TikTok is introducing is that we've been leaning first on user-generated playlists,
Mm-hmm.
then and editorial playlists, algorithms. There's tons of, like a year or two ago, tons of conversation about user-generated playlists versus algorithms, and lean
Mm-hmm.
back and lean in, internet, interactive streaming versus non-interactive, lots of conversation about that. But TikTok is actually bringing in the idea of social-based discovery, which has kind of
Mm-hmm.
been missing in a lot of, I mean, obviously you've got
Absolutely.
Instagram and Facebook where some of that stuff is happening, but it doesn't have as tactile and auditory feel as TikTok, where you get connected because of a video. It could be a dance
Mm-hmm.
craze, it could be a prank, or it could just be a homemade music video. But there's a way in which it's stickier than YouTube, where somebody can interact and then everybody's like, they're interacting around a song they never would have listened to. So I've got a almost 21-year-old kid and in college, and she's discovering music now from TikTok memes. Whereas before she was relying solely on, well, first YouTube, and then when I got her a
Mm-hmm.
Spotify family subscription, then Spotify algorithms, and obviously her friends all the time. But you get this
Yeah.
sort of like this other type of like spiky discovery process that's happening that's really interesting on TikTok as well. So, Trisha, one that I wanted to bring up related to music listening is Amazon Music, because I just
Mm-hmm.
saw our buddy Kevin Bruner from CD Baby, VP of marketing there, who is also an artist, is in a band called Small Town Poets. He literally just posted on Facebook the day before we recorded this that there was all of a sudden Amazon Music was second for their streaming platforms that they are spiking on. So it went
Mm-hmm.
from Spotify, Apple, whatever else, to Spotify, Amazon Music, and he's implying that Amazon Music is projected or positioned to overtake his Spotify listeners as a band. So the reason
Mm-hmm.
I bring that up is Amazon has kind of been this Trojan horse stealth
Yeah.
streaming service where, initially everyone was just like, yeah, well, they just wanted to add something to keep people in the ecosystem. It's an older audience, AKA ignore them and so forth. But because of their ecosystem play, they're just gradually grabbing more and more market share as they go. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with Amazon Music. Obviously, we're working from home, guys. We got kids coming in and out. Trisha's done an amazing job of
Sorry, good
getting
for
tons of work done. She sent them off on a scavenger hunt, and they showed back up in the middle of our podcast.
they weren't able to find the thing that they were looking for, but we'll solve that problem later. Yeah, Amazon is really interesting, and it's, it'd be so interesting to compare what groups feel like they're doing particularly well, and where, are there particular genres that people go to, etc. And there's some talk about, it's baked into Prime, so how much is it really? But if we're looking at actual streams, that of course is a different question.
Well, the other thing you'll remember at the Isolator Innovate Summit that we just had a couple weeks ago, Mark Mulligan from Media Research was talking about what are the essential needs that humans have right now under lockdown and during the pandemic, and he talked about how this lockdown, work from home, remote work, all this stuff is really pushing from the mobile device over to the smart speaker. And so another thing that Amazon probably benefits from is that if you are a Prime member and you've got an Amazon smart speaker, you're probably going to be listening more using that device, which is actually a more frictionless. We've talked about ambient technology as a factor to take into account in the future of music listening. It has less friction than a mobile, because on mobile you got to turn it on, you got to
Mm-hmm.
unlock it, you got to find your streaming service, you got to select something. Whereas literally with your speaker, you don't have to take out a device. You just say, hey, device, play Small Town Poets, and boom, you're listening to it right away. So the more people are home, probably is a benefit for Amazon Music, because they have such a large market share on smart speakers. Now, Trisha, we can't not talk about live streaming.
Uh-huh.
You put that on our list. Obviously, with the entire crash of live music in the music industry, all of a sudden live streaming became something instead of being the step sibling, it became the sexy step sibling of the
Yeah.
music industry. Although this is a strange step sibling because they act a little bit weird. You're not really sure where they stand with money. You know, they're a little bit outside of social norms. So let's talk
Yeah.
about live streaming for a bit.
It was really interesting because you went from this like the weirdo kids that are doing strange things on Twitch, and are they gamers, are they YouTubers, like what the hell are these people, and that was sort of the stereotype people had of live streaming, though there were always you know, folk artists and a bunch of other artists who had somehow built a little empire for themselves on live streaming. Well, very small, little teeny tiny. Anyway, I mean, you know, it's folk music. We want the little one, the little empire. Anyway, and then as you know, with the whole change in how we lived our lives, all of a sudden we find out there's like all of these live streaming startups. There's all of these options about monetization. That Twitch is pretty good for music, I guess, depending on what you want to do. Like if you just want to broadcast to the biggest possible audience, or Instagram is great for DJ club nights. You know, all these things that we didn't know. And I think the cool thing it's happening really fast is because it's come out of the shadows so quickly, people are thinking really hard about, okay, maybe deliberately about how can we maximize this? How can we create something that is a quality a quality funnel? Sorry, a quality funnel for people so that they can move from just broadcasting and exposure and all that stuff that we know doesn't work very well for artists, for most artists, and move to something where I can invite you to what is essentially an intimate private space where I can interact with you as a human and present my music and play for you and talk to you and have all sorts of extra things that aren't really just like a social post of my lunch or like I'm in the studio. I mean, feels like more in depth, more human, and frankly, kind of exciting probably for, depending on, for some artists, to share their creative world in a more substantive way with people who really care, and are willing to you know, pay an entry fee in order to enjoy that. So it's kind of we're at a really interesting moment. It's going to be really cool to see what creative stuff happens.
Yeah.
Like there's some creative stuff happening right now.
I know your kids make music, so we might hear some music in the background, unless you've got their computer.
I have the main music hub here, so we won't be hearing any. One of my kids likes to make club beats or something that sounds like Xenakis Goes to the Circus. So
awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, the whole live streaming thing is still playing out. You know, it literally was something that most of the music industry seemed like they were sort of like might test like several years ago, and then it just didn't fulfill. Like fans weren't engaging enough, but now it's the only choice. And so it's been interesting to see the conversations about monetization. So much free music has been floating around in terms of live streaming. People just saying, look, I'm not going to just sit home and not do anything. So I'm going to try this, but I don't know if people will pay for it. So we'll do lots of free stuff and then maybe test out ticketing versus fan engagement models and so forth. Everything from buying emojis on Twitch to tip jars via PayPal or Venmo, all the way to something like Topeka.live, which we interviewed on a previous podcast, where you could actually buy like a VIP experience, a one-on-one. Basically what Trisha and I are doing now, I could be paying Trisha $400 for an hour of her time so we get to chat because she's a famous musician or just a musician that I love, or have her serenade my spouse, or, you know,
like,
who knows.
my kids will happily do that for about $1. So
yeah.
just to put it out there.
That's more of a Fiverr kind of experience.
TaskRabbit.
And so, you know, another thing that's super interesting about live streaming is, will it stick? Not only for performers, but also for fans. You know, over time, will people want that type of experience? But then again, there's new mediums forming too. You know, whether it's the Twitch experience or Soccer Mommy did, it's not in performance, but played Stardew Valley on YouTube while her friends were chatting with her, so she could answer. This is something we learned about in the Isolator Innovate forum as well. She could answer and interact with fans in another kind of way. I mean, obviously, if she's going to play video games anyway, you know, that's an easy way for engagement. But whatever habits both fans and artists are creating now, some of them are bound to stick. New formats are emerging. People are getting used to new habits and so forth. So
I definitely think games, you know, are just like live streaming, like playing in a game or having a game experience that's related to music or music performances has gotten mainstream really fast as well. And the interesting thing too is you have the sort of super high end, like the Travis Scott Fortnite thing, which apparently, you know, the budget was massive. You had a whole team of developers and illustrators. It's a huge endeavor, just like a big national tour would be, right? You'd have the same size of crew and the same kind of personnel expenses. Then you have really lo-fi things that people are doing. And, you know, while I'm sure, you know, if you look at like Diplo or whatever in Minecraft, it's fancier and more developed. But like, I think Charlie XCX did something that was just like pretty off the cuff. She's like, I don't know what Minecraft is, but here I am. I'm spinning records. You know, it was pretty fun. So there are many ways that I think musicians are figuring out how to get into games or to reach their audiences via games. And I love that simple like soccer mommy example, because it's like she's not hiring, you know, 20 people to develop a virtual soccer mommy experience where there's like exploding shit and skins and all that.
Right.
Anyway, so
yeah. So I think we've only got about 10 minutes till you've got another thing to go to. So we should probably pick up the pace here. One of the ones that I think we should at least mention is rise of podcasts. Obviously, over the last year and a half, we've seen Spotify make some big acquisitions we've talked about on the podcast before. They made even more kind of content moves recently.
Joe Rogan.
And, yep, exactly. Which reminds me of the moment when SiriusXM did their deals with Howard Stern and NPR hosts and Bob Edwards and things like that really ended up driving content over there. So I feel like they took a page from there. Obviously, people are saying, well, podcasts are cheaper to pay for than music. There's no licensing issues. And then it gives them a second chance to advertise as well, whether within the podcast or through the app with native ads. But I think that's just thinking about the audio experience. I mean, our client Super Hi-Fi just helped Sonos launch their audio experience, which has a lot to do with how you bring in both music and non-music audio and use AI and other tools to make them seamless to create an audio experience. It's another kind of ecosystem play. Again, Mark Mulligan from Media talked at our event last week about music and contextual formats. And I think that podcast, whereas, Spotify might, make music for different experiences. If it's within a podcast experience, the music is part of whatever people are already doing, which is kind of interesting. You want to talk about AI? Speaking of AI?
Sure, I always like to talk about AI. AI, it was funny, when we first started the podcast, AI was like this, like, whoa, like what is going to happen? Like, no, and then there was a lot of mixed reactions, both the sort of on the more like tech friendly side of like, this is going to be awesome, it's going to solve all these problems, it's going to do all these things. And then the musicians who are like, but I'm a songwriter and I have a soul and the computers don't have souls. And you still see some of that dialogue going on back and forth. I mean, obviously that's probably going to go on for decades and generations in various shapes and forms. But AI kind of has reached maybe even like a new plateau. I'm sure there's gradual progress being made, but there's a lot of really cool things that people have figured out how to do both on the generative side and on the sort of labeling, tagging, dealing with huge bodies of data and surfacing interesting things for professional or other fun uses. So it's kind of settling into a groove in the industry and playing some really specific roles, whether it's like generating an endless stream of meditative music or helping you alter beats to suit your running experience, to something that's more along the lines of like, I really need to find a song that sounds like birthday cake, help me AI, and it pulls it out of your 2 million track catalog or whatever. So there's kind of like these distinct areas that have developed in the last 2 years, maybe, and the technology itself, some of it has become open source and kind of a commodity already. And so in some ways that's great because people can actually make it more useful instead of it being like a whiz bang, like, here, sign this check for a couple $1 million for my bizarre startup. It's actually the AI is actually helping us now and is coalesced into useful tools.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's it started with a kind of a lot of fear and concern, and now it feels like it's kind of leveled out as a tool that's useful in a lot of different ways. And of course, when we see a hit that's very AI driven or that's derivative using AI from somebody else's work, I think the controversy will emerge again. But it's also nice to see that there's some progress being made that's less threatening to a job and feels more like, oh great, we've got a new type of pickaxe, it's awesome.
The diamond pickaxe.
Now that we're buried, yeah, exactly, right. Now that we're buried in, you can tell we both have 11-year-old kids. Now that we're buried in data, there are some great functions that we couldn't use a regular pickaxe for, that we've got to use potions to really get them super kind of supersized or whatever. So speaking of which, there's been an explosion of creator tools, and that to me is a new emergence. There's been, for several years, obviously, and really for decades, there's been more and more, whether it's music making instruments and tools or, audio sharing tools, all that kind of stuff. That's, SoundCloud's been around for a long time, but what we're seeing is more specific kind of tools for creators, whether it's audio or video, whether it's what you would call a professional musician versus an amateur musician. Those things are starting to make things merge in a way. And I think since we launched the podcast, we've really seen DIY and independent music go from this, like, yeah, they just don't have access to as much stuff to make a real go at a career, to people saying, wow, just the size, the long tail, which has kind of been poo-pooed for a long time, actually does matter when you think about the monetization and commercialization of music. And so you see a lot of companies that were solely focused on breaking bigger artists, acquiring companies, building tools, adding a distribution platform, all these things that show that they're like, oh, maybe we should be paying attention to these, these no-name artists or these amateur artists or whatever, that A, it's a good A&R funnel, but B, there really is a fattening of the tail. I know the long tail, the book, the Chris Anderson book, has been criticized tons, but it may just be that people didn't wait long enough to see what was happening. And there's still a role for big name artists as well, obviously, in the marketplace.
There's been a couple articles lately debating, with the sort of rise, I'm thinking more from the media perspective, of the rise of the Substack newsletter and journalists making a decent living, not in a newsroom, but by getting subscriptions to a very specialized newsletter that has a very clear perspective. How many people do you really need to fund your creative life? And there's a long discussion we could have about how many professional musicians have there been over the history of humanity, and that history has yet to be like really well researched and written. But I would argue that there are some interesting opportunities, and you don't need to have, obviously if you're looking for money from a streaming platform, you do need scale. But if you have other things to offer, there are a lot of people out there who are figuring out ways to have a decent life and make it okay living by having 100 to 1,000 passionate supporters. And we're not just talking about Patreon, we're talking about people who are piecing things together in a variety of different ways. So it's not as, things are getting really interesting. And that middle section is, as you said, I think getting a little thicker and fatter and broader. And that can be frustrating for the people at the upper end who are like so close to being able to have a middle-class lifestyle from their music or their creativity, to like people who are like, hey, I do this as like a hobby, but I'm also like able to do cool stuff with the money I make and reinvest in my own projects. And, there's all sorts of interesting variety out there. And it feels like it's very much like, again, coming together. So we don't really know how to categorize it very well yet. And a lot of the terms and economic like structures we use to think about it maybe don't serve very well anymore. I don't know.
Yeah.
Getting a little meta here.
No, that's part of music tectonics, right? We're looking beneath the surface of music and tech to see what the bigger shifts are that are just barely emerging. That's what this episode's been about, but that's what the podcast is about. It's what our conference and our online events, our weekly Wednesdays, which we do at 12 p.m. Eastern on various online platforms. We've been using Zoom, but we might try some other stuff soon. So go to musictectonics.com to check that out. Before we wrap up real quick, Trista, one other thing that could shift that is the consolidation going on in the industry, the IPOs that are up. Want to talk about that for just a brief minute before we wrap up?
Yeah, there's been sort of a renewed wave of financialization of the music business, whether it's through private equity or public offerings. And that is, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It means the industry is doing pretty well, right? Like investors don't flock to something that's like about to just self-destruct. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they do. Usually.
It may also mean that it's peaking, right? Because
that's
people
true.
like to cash out at that moment. Of course,
that's right.
I don't think that's totally true, but there's some risk involved with waiting. So,
but consolidation, as we've seen in tech, is a double-edged sword. It can mean you have an amazing scale and can do really cool big things that are global. It can also mean that you are getting, the boa constrictor is kind of strangling itself. You're eating your own tail in the end, and there's no room for breakout ideas because you've got this big cumbersome structure. That may or may not be true, and startups aren't always coming up with the most original crazy things anyway. See van pizzas and all the other 15,000 scooter startups, all that kind of thing. But
right.
That said, it is something to think about, like where the idea is going to come from and how are artists going to be able to get their perspective through, unless I know there have been some organizing efforts lately that have been feel more substantial than past kind of things, because it's a serious issue and artists are kind of saying they got to get together in some kind of way, shape, or form to deal with the consolidation. They have to sneak in.
We saw a little head peek out there. It's pretty cool.
What do you mean? What are you talking about?
Okay.
So this has been fun, Trista. I guess we should do a shout out to all the parents who are working from home and managing this amazing. And Trista, you do such a great job at it. This has been cool to see it on camera. I'm sure you love it.
Well, you didn't see Yelly Mommy on camera, but I try to keep
Yelly Mommy
in the closet as much as possible. She does come out on occasion.
Oh, when the camera's on, what the heck? But this is Music Tectonics 100th episode on video during the lockdown, during remote work. People are starting to open up, but we're just testing out video. Let us know if you like seeing our faces or if you've just discovered Music Tectonics for the first time because it's on video. I know people, good friends of mine, colleagues who are like, yeah, I've never listened to your podcast because I don't listen to any podcast, but they may watch video, they may read our blog, things like that too. So would love feedback on that. Make sure to sign up to the Music Tectonics newsletter at musictectonics.com. You'll find out about our app, which you can join right now at app.musictectonics.com. It's a music tech community. It's where innovators are coming together to read articles that we curate, but also introduce themselves, do networking, have conversations, ask for advice. We're giving out some free resources there. We have a pivot worksheet, which is a tool that any music tech startup can use to think through, is it time to make some sort of pivot or to double down? So go to the app and check that out. Make sure on the website to check out Weekly Webs Days. It's our weekly meetups and panels and things like that. We'll also keep you posted on the occasional online event that's a full day or two. And we'll keep you posted about the Music Tectonics conference that we currently have planned for LA in October. Trista, this has been fun. Thanks for coming back on with me.
Oh, it's always fun. Thanks. Can't think of anything more fun than talking about music tech, actually.
Yeah, it's awesome. And thanks for listening. Right. Subscribe wherever you're listening, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Glad to have you, and stay posted for more. See you soon.
Bye. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.